Hey everyone, it's time for part 2 of my ultimate guide to Pattern Magazine, one of my favorite topics. And if you haven't already, please check out my first video where I review a bunch of them. Link will be up here and of course in the description section. And what I will talk about in this video is talk about several of the common pattern magazines and talk about the pros and cons, the sizing, the styling, the instructions, are they any good or perhaps even bad? All that and more is what I'm going to talk about in today's video. My Image is a Dutch pattern magazine that has been around for many years now actually, but it's not that known, I think, at least here in Sweden. And each issue is around 20 patterns. It's only females from what I can tell, and they only come out with 2 to 3 issues per year. And the size range is, I would say, really good for a pattern magazine. It runs from 34 to 52, and it also has X small to 3X large for some patterns. Compared to most other pattern magazines that do several language edition, My Image has picked another way to do that. So they have actually instructions in English, French, German, and Dutch in the same issue. Now, that makes for a pretty crowded instruction page, and it's mostly text, I would say, but some patterns comes with some nicely illustrated instruction, but it's definitely not a very thorough step-by-step solution. And as I said, because there's so many language, the instruction pages can seem a little bit crowded. As for the styles, well, I would say they're very simple. Classic, perhaps, and not trendy at all, more like basics with a couple of slightly more elaborate designs. Now, this is definitely not the pattern magazine for those of you who loves intricate detailing and more, time-consuming pattern. This is basically simple styles where you let the fabric do the talking, perhaps. And I've also noticed that My Image also sells fabrics for their patterns, so that makes it also a nice option if you want to make the exact same styles. That said, I'm not really sure about the international availability for that. Lamia Boutique. This is an Italian pattern magazine, has been around for a very long time, and it comes out with 12 issues per year. As for the styles of Lamia Boutique, well, they are a mixed bag if you ask me. Some doesn't exactly follow contemporary fashion in my opinion, and well, they can look a bit dated. On the other hand, some styles are very much on trend with current ready-to-wear, I would say. As for the sizing, it runs from 38 to 54. Now, a couple of things to note here. First of all, Italian sizing, same as with Spanish sizing, is actually smaller than the Northern European sizing that use the same numbering. So a size 38 in Italy is actually a size 36 when it comes to Burda style and other Northern European pattern magazines. Also, not all patterns have this size range, so there are usually about 4 or 5 different sizes for each style. As for the instructions, well, I would say they're very, very basic. This is not a magazine for those who need visual instructions. Of course, the instructions is in Italian only, and also the instructions is basically grouped together in a bullet points list with no paragraphs, breaks, or numbers. So this is definitely not a magazine for those who need visual instructions, unless they have changed lately, which I haven't bought this pattern magazine in a while. They do have a couple of pages with illustrated instructions for some common steps such as inserting a zipper, but apart from that, the instructions are very basic. One big gripe with Lamia Boutique, and that is, if you look closely, you will see that a lot of the garments on the pages are actually done in garment factories and looks very much like ready-wear, using techniques that is not available to us home sewers. For instance, take a look at these pair of dungarees. These are clearly made in a garment factory, and then they have created a pattern around that, which I think is a little bit misleading and doesn't make us think that we can actually copy the result of the pattern magazine. Another thing to note that Lamia Boutique, the models tend to be very slim. Even for the plus range, the models are quite slim. One pattern magazine that I think is getting increasingly popular and has taken a little bit of a different road is La Maison Victor. Sorry for my somewhat bad French pronunciation, but it's a Belgian pattern magazine that does both female and some male pattern. For the size range, it's massive in my opinion. It runs from size 30 up all the way to 56. That's pretty good, I will have to say. And for the men, the sizings run from XX small to XX large. Again, that's a really big size range compared to most other pattern magazines. And La Maison comes out in 4 different editions: German, Dutch, French, and English. And in each issue there's around 15 patterns, which doesn't sound a lot. And the reason is that these magazines have wonderfully detailed, illustrated, step-by-step instructions. I would actually say that a lot of the instructions in La Maison Victor actually rivals regular envelope patterns, and that says a lot. As for the style, I would say it's quite contemporary, similar to Knip Mode and some other pattern magazine from Northern Europe. It's fairly easy patterns for the most part, and I would say that this is a magazine perhaps primarily geared towards beginners, which also the description says on the sides, but there are also some more complicated styles, such as these dress pants for men, which, by the way, has fantastic illustrated instructions. So this is worth the price alone, seeing how to construct a pair of regular dress trousers like this. As you probably noticed with this video and my last video, which I talked about other pattern magazines is definitely very much a European affair. So it's really nice to be able to feature a pattern magazine from another part of the world. And this is the cult classic Mrs. Style book. It's a Japanese pattern magazine that shows how to draft patterns using basic blocks. So this is not a traditional pattern magazine in the European sense, but in most issues of the Mrs. Style book, there's usually a pattern sheet included as well with a handful of patterns. So what you need to know about how Mrs. Style book differs from most European pattern magazine is that the patterns in each issue is based on using your own personal pattern blocks that you adapt for each style. So you can use whatever type of pattern making book that you have to draft your own personal basic block for trousers, tops, etc. And then you follow the instructions for each style on how to adapt the pattern to create this particular design. The instructions are in Japanese, but extremely visual. So if you have some pattern drafting experience beforehand, you'll find that the instructions are fairly easy to figure out, in my opinion. Plus, basically, each issue is like a book in pattern making, and that alone, in my opinion, makes it worth investing in this pattern magazine. I have used this edition so much for my own pattern making as well, just because there are so many options on how to draft different sleeve types and all that sort of stuff. Now, as I said, the focus is very much on how to adapt your personal pattern blocks, but there are also illustrated instructions for how to sew the garment. But they're not like detailed step by step for the most part. As for the sizing, well, it's based on your own personal measurement, which is great, but there's usually also included a pattern sheet for a handful of styles, and that sizing is very limited. Actually, in the ones I have, it just goes from small to large. And good to know also is that in Japan, a small is much smaller than in most Western countries. So for instance, in Sweden, I am a small for my tops in ready to wear, but when I compare measurements, I realize that I will be a large in Japan. So that's good to know if you're looking to use the designed patterns and not just draft your own. As for the styles, well, they're really classic, and I wouldn't actually call them fashion forward necessarily. And perhaps some of the styles fits better in all the demographic. That said, personally, I love the styles, and I think many of them are timeless. For instance, the issue that I'm showing you here, guys, is actually from 2008. And I really like this sort of classic, slightly timeless, retro-looking style. So I'm really into the Miss Style book, but it's good to know that perhaps it's not as fashion-forward as, for instance, Burda style, in my opinion. So this was part 2 of my ultimate guide to pattern magazine, and if you're curious more about other pattern magazines, I've done several videos especially about Burda style, and a link will be of course in that as well in the description section. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about these pattern magazines. Do you agree with me? Do you have any other favorites? And I'd also love to know if you have any more tips on pattern magazine, because I'm definitely aware that this is not a complete guide, and it's also a bit limited by the availability in my particular country, which is Sweden. That said, I think I have a bigger range than in many other countries, because your pattern magazine is still a pretty big thing in Europe, whereas I feel that I could be wrong, but I noticed that Europe and Japan are two places where you can actually still get a lot of pattern magazines, but I don't think it's quite common in other different areas of the world. So I'm really curious about the situation in your country. What sort of pattern magazines are available to you, and are they also price worthy enough? Because I can imagine that it's quite more expensive to get one of these pattern magazines outside of Europe, for instance, and that's the same with the Japanese pattern magazine. That was not cheap to get to here, but definitely worth it in this case. I love Miss Stylebook. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for weekly sewing videos. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!